Okay. I think I'm going to admit people, so you will see people coming in here as well. Yeah. Hey, everybody, welcome. We're just about to get started. Okay, awesome. Hey, everybody, I am Aravind from the Sustainability Mafia, or as some of you might know as SusMafia. We are a network of climate founders and climate communities. But today, it's not about SusMafia. It's about something much broader than that. It's about how design and sustainability need to be integrated, and how they're already integrated, where there are opportunities. So we have three amazing speakers with us who are also going to be talking about something really cool that's going to happen in March. So you will have the time towards the end of this session to ask them some questions about the event as well as design and sustainability broadly. But let me quickly introduce them and also talk about what.
Did we just lose Arvind?
It looks like it, yes.
I thought it
Am
was.
I back?
Okay.
Am I back?
Yes,
You're
correct.
You're back. Okay.
Okay. So maybe I'll just quickly start off again. So we have Ayush, who's the co-founder of Quicksand and UnBox Cultural Futures. And he is a champion of human-centered design for social impact. We have Richard, who's the co-founder and director of What Design Can Do. He is leading global conversations on how design can drive real change, right? We also have Mridu, who's the co-founder of the Design Village India, and she is reimagining design education and really creating problem solvers for the future who are going to be using design as a lever, right? So now let's talk design, right? South Asia is home to more than 2 billion people, and a lot of them are going to be consuming things, doing things all across their day, all across their lives. Uh, but what does designing for them look like? That's what we are really going to get into today. And I'm going to start us off with Ayush, and then Ayush can potentially pass it on to Mridu. But for the first really 10 minutes, really talk about the South Asian design context, right? So really, let's get into it. Ayush, go ahead.
Thanks, Arvind. Pleasure to be part of this panel and excited to actually, towards the end of it, also sharing about the event next month. So, as you introduced in the beginning, Quicksand's been in the design for social impact space for almost 2 decades now. For us, I think the first important bit is, do we understand who the next billion are, right? Because that's a pretty broad kind of brushstroke, and there have been all kinds of attempts in terms of defining kind of that segment. But because most of us here on this call would be familiar with the Indian context, the way we have experience kind of working at this end of the segment, and the tremendous potential there is, and the threshold at which this segment lies right now, right? And it is different from what has, for decades been characterized as base of the pyramid. But moving away from that definition to a slightly more nuanced definition of what has been, in fact, by some venture funds, has been characterized as entrepreneurial households, right? This is kind of the low and middle income households. In the context of India, think about semi kind of urban or primarily rural districts like Gorakhpur in UP, or Rajkot in Gujarat, or Belgaum in Karnataka. This is where this population kind of lives, and it is a population that is poised for exponential growth for several reasons, several macroeconomic reasons that we've seen kind of in the last 2 decades in the country. And so, it's the potential of this kind of population group that we're really talking about. And if you think about, just in terms of the core set of services that all of us consume, think about finance, access to credit, think about healthcare, which is access to reliable kind of healthcare services, think about education, which is, access to quality education. If you look at these centers, uh, none of these are really reaching this next billion. So when we talk about next billion and the tremendous opportunity that kind of lies, is the ability to actually provide finance, education, healthcare, and on the back of it, all the other kind of consumption that is slated to happen. So that's the big opportunity we're talking about, and you can expand that to the rest of South Asia. But then the tension there is that once this class that is obviously thirsting for a better quality of life, is aspirational, is entrepreneurial in terms of what they're doing for themselves and their family, once this class comes into the consumptive economy and starts to push the per capita consumption above where we are, that's where the tension actually really lies, of how do you service the needs and aspirations of this group while being true to principles of sustainability. So I think what we're talking about today is really, I think we're poised at a moment in time where this conversation becomes very, very critical, because there is an aspirational kind of middle class that is actually thirsting for better services. They are going to come into the consumptive economy. And honestly, I don't think we have answers in terms of how do we address their consumption while being fairer to the planet that we are all drawing from. So I feel like that for me is the tension that we should really be speaking about. And that's the context of South Asia. So on that note, maybe I'll pass it on to Mridu.
Thanks, Ayush. So I'm Mridu and I'm representing the Design Village. It is India's first social impact design institute. And I would like to take this question a little bit from a designer's role. For too long, designers have just serviced the top part of the pyramid simply because we are connected with affordability and so on. And I think that now, at least for over a decade since our inception, it is high time that we look at the 90% of India also to be addressed through design. I want to give you one quick example. One of TDV's promoters worked with students of TU Delft, because at that time in India, perhaps there were not enough schools doing social design, and developed the life straw. And life straw is this straw that can really, you go to an environment which has dirty water, you use the straw and it will give you filtered water. And what this does is, this is a product design. Of course, now we have various other examples of systems and so on. But what we're trying to say is that constraints can be catalysts. Designers can work with NGOs and governments. And it is high time we try to unlock the potential of what design can do and not just what design is. Because majority of our education in India currently focuses on what design is. Design is a pattern, design is a chair, design is a garment. But what can designers do more? And with this mission and this alignment, we have joined hands together with What Design Can Do, UnBox and Quicksand, to really bring at the forefront a designer's responsibility in today's times. Thank you.
I think that's a great segue, right? Like we spoke about the scale of the number of people, but what about the problem? What are the sustainability imperatives, right? Let's start with you, Mridu, and then you can pass it on to Ayush and Richard. What are the sustainability imperatives that you see?
Sure. I think from a designer's point of view today, all challenges are design challenges. Firstly, we must rise up to the occasion and take responsibility, because we happen to be the creators of society. If today you go to the landfills, you wonder who created that. And I think part of the responsibility lies with the creators who never thought of the impact their creation would have. So from that point of view, at least in South Asia or India, what I would say are big challenges. Of course, economically, we are infrastructure deficit in India right now. Geographically or geopolitically, we have hostile neighbors. And environmentally, which is the most, I would say, most logical and easiest to address in comparison to the others, is environmentally, where you have water, whether it's scarcity or pollution, you have waste. Take the example of Kumbh, waste management, such a big challenge in India, and so on. And I think air pollution, and I would like to say that we also share a part of this with our South Asian counterparts.
Great. Ayush, you want to add on to that? I think what you could potentially talk about is like, how does this layer up with the innovation part of it, right? Like there are problems,
Yeah.
and there are innovations, right? And then I'd love you and Richard to have a little bit of a tango on that.
Sure, sure. I think maybe let me kind of touch upon a different aspect because the materiality of this entire sort of discourse on sustainability is well known. We talk about how do we eliminate waste, how do we embed kind of circular design principles. These are the imperatives when you talk about the material economy. But a lot of the innovation, so to speak, that we are seeing, especially for South Asia, is also digital, right? Whether when it comes to finance, obviously we've demonstrated that we've leapfrogged actually several decades of what have been more traditional financial innovation. Similar kind of innovation poised to happen in healthcare and education, all three, right? Services. So, but when you talk about the sustainability imperatives, do we understand what it costs us to do or to run an AI query, right? Or a Google search query? How much energy are we consuming? And you're looking at servicing 140 crore population and 2 billion in the context of South Asia. If digital kind of services is going to drive growth and prosperity, are we aware of the material consequences of that? I think for us as a region, that's one of the biggest sustainability imperatives. And so, and who are the people who are actually building and designing these systems? There are actually a cadre of designers that are behind it, right? There is a technology, of course. There's core engineering that is building that infrastructure. But what makes it usable, what makes it more sort of attractive, are actually a set of designers who are going to drive people to use and utilize those digital services. So I think that is where designers of tomorrow need to think about. How do you think of technology systems? I think a lot of conversation has been on the materiality, but this immaterial form of growth and prosperity that we're seeing through technology and digital innovation is really the new frontier, and that's, I think, is the call to action. Richard, the stage is yours.
Finally, the stage is mine. First of all, thank you so much for having me in this I think important conversation. So happy to be here, and also happy to be in India very soon. Of course, I completely agree with what Mridu and Ayush bring to the table. Maybe I can add something, because of course it's when you're talking about innovation, it's indeed about all the new technological innovations, where of course AI is I don't have to explain that, we all know that. What I also think is important to not only acknowledge, but really to embrace, is as we call indigenous knowledge, or frugal innovation, or give it a nice name. We are talking here with What Design Can Do. We do a lot of talking and researching and acting on the circular design agenda. And that, of course, entails waste management, also regenerative design. It's a very big story. But the funny thing is that, for example, in the Netherlands, and I think that counts for a big chunk of the so-called West, 100 to 150 years ago, the Netherlands was 100% circular. And that all had to do with the fact that technological innovation was not there yet. And through technological innovation, we sort of forgot all that very important knowledge that is about circularity. And with what design can do, and I also think that many other organizations and designers are doing that, it's a very important agenda. Many designers try to bring back that old knowledge. So whether you live in the Netherlands or you live in Delhi or you live in the United States or in Brazil, you see a big movement of you could say the creative sector, creative community, to revalue and re-embrace that knowledge, and of course come up with new interpretations, because it is about now and it's not about yesterday, of course. But I think that's what Ayush mentioned. It's on one hand it's about technology, and on the other hand it's about as I call it, local old knowledge that we should not forget. And I think that for example, a country like India, in that sense, has a great opportunity here, where I think that many countries and economies in the West fucked it up. In India, there's still a great opportunity to do it well, but of course, it's also a tremendous challenge when you're talking about this next billion people, and so also a big task for, of course, for the government, for companies, and for the design fraternity. To steer that in the right direction.
Right, and I think that's a great moment for maybe Richard, for you to continue talking about design, right? I think what design can do, that's what you are really all about, right? Design that matters, design that actually works. So of course you and Ayush. Yeah, you and Ayush have worked together on an open innovation challenge. You've obviously seen your fair share of solutions. So how would you talk about design as a catalyst? I think we spoke about the geographical context. We spoke about the socio-economic context, the people, the problems. But how does design really fit in here, right? Like, help us see that. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Now I can tell you something about that, maybe more on a meta level, and then maybe Ayush and or Mridu can fill it in more on the Indian or South Asian perspective. You can say, I always like that quote, that design brought us into this shit, and now design has to take us out of this shit. I always like that one very much because I think it's very true. As already mentioned in this conversation, again, whether you live in the Netherlands or in India, we're all part of a consumption-driven system, and in that consumption-driven system, throughout the decades, designers contributed to that very toxic and polluting and harmful system. So we are guilty, so to say. Of course, we're not the only ones, because it's also lack of policy. I think that the government has a huge role to play, and it also counts, of course, for companies. But still, the design has been part of that system, so that needs to change. But very important is, of course, human behavior, and we are convinced that design can play a very positive and optimistic role there. I think we all know that feeling about there's this big transformation that we need to go through, and nobody really feels like going through that transformation because it hurts. Nobody will like it because we have to stop eating meat. We cannot fly anymore. Everybody should switch over to electricity, and etc., etc., etc. So much that we need to do or stop doing. that people also see that as there are a lot of thresholds in changing your behavior. Now, we think that with design, we can make that transformation, that future, also desirable. And I think that that's a very crucial word, that design makes things desirable, where other people think that it's a problem or a challenge that we will never overcome. So I think that's also one of the big roles that design has to play here. So that we are able to change our behavior, because what you see on the horizon is in fact better than where we are now. And of course that's a big, a big assignment for the design industry. But I think that's where the holy grail is, that we do not step away from that what is so important in design, and that is desirability, beauty. Sometimes when you're talking about the social impact of design, people hardly dare to say that anymore, that things are beautiful or must be beautiful, but that makes it so desirable. That is our unique selling point, and that is such an important part of the whole story. And so again, that's on a meta level. I think that's important, that we as a design community are able to envision a brighter future, make products and services that work, that make you happy, that spark optimism because it's innovative, it's beautiful, etc., etc. But one other thing that I really think is important to mention. There's also, I'm constantly referring back to the Netherlands because I'm from the Netherlands, but here in the Netherlands, there's already decades ago, the government started a campaign about, and it was called A Better Environment Starts With Yourself. And I've always hated that because it's so untrue. Change, of course, it happens in the minds and behavior of people, but we should also not underestimate how small, how tight the path is that you as a citizen or as a consumer can walk. There are already so many decisions that are made, and your wallet is always so much smaller than that of a multinational or the government. So my pledge is also that the government needs to come up with the right policies, and that's extremely important, so that they tell companies, this is what you can do and this is what you cannot do. So then companies need to change their business, and for that they need the best designers to make that happen. And if we work in that circle, then I'm convinced that we will get to the other side of the river. But again, it's a very important thing is how the government acts, and that is, that sometimes can also make you as a designer feel a bit helpless, because that is so important. But anyway, having said that, over to Ayush or Mridu.
Sure, I can maybe just add a little bit texture to what Richard said. This idea of design being beautiful and beauty being inherently sustainable, because things of beauty are things that we care for, and we've seen this in the built environment. We've seen, the buildings that have stood the test of time, that the community cares for, that societies rally around, are things that were built beautifully. So, I think Mridu can perhaps chime in, knowing that there is an architectural firm also behind, the design village, is that if you look at the built environment, that in contemporary times, that's the first thing that has actually moved away from things of beauty. It has been determined by more commercial factors of, what is the real estate that you optimize. But somewhere kind of, beauty as an idea, as a principle, has been put to the wayside. So I think it's important for us to remember and kind of reclaim that aspect of design, that the craft and the beauty that we put into things that we make are actually going to make them sustainable. I think our wardrobes are perhaps testimony to it. You wouldn't throw a garment that you've liked and adorned for years. You wouldn't throw kind of a device that you think is something you care for. That said, I mean, maybe just two other things, Arvind, on how design can contribute. So completely 100%, design has been the one of the big reasons why we are in the mess that we are. Uh, but there are maybe two things. I'm just looking back at our practice. We keep talking about how design is meant to think at a systems level, right? That anything you design has a set of interconnections, and it's there are several other kind of pieces that it will impact. And so whenever you're designing even a simple interaction, you have to think about 10 other things that will be spawned because of it. I think in that systems kind of framework, we have to now really and urgently bring in the planetary system that we're connected to. And I don't think design has thought enough about it. So one hope is that this platform actually, sort of is a wake up call to bring sort of more life-centered design, more planet-centered design, and how we incorporate that in our kind of systems thinking. The other is that the first principles approach of design, which is that you embed yourself in the communities for whom you're designing, understand ground up what the needs are, what is that environment in which you're going to place your design solution, and that's where you will discover the indigenous knowledge that Richard's talking about. And that's where you will realize that we can't be a hammer that is just looking for a nail to hammer. I think we have to figure out what is the need and then design first principles, which was really, which has been the biggest remit of human-centered design as we've known and practiced. So bring kind of planet into our systems thinking, and take and hark back to first principles approach, understand who you're designing for, and some of these principles of sustainability will automatically come to fruition. Mridu.
Absolutely, Ayush. I think architects and architecture cannot ignore their responsibility. But I think it has a lot to do with us getting colonized as well. Even though when India got independence, you should see the architecture of the time where everyone wanted to build the nation. And now just look at the state of Gurgaon. It's like pasting Manhattan in New Delhi. And the idea of beauty must also evolve in our mind, and it should not be about taste. For example, I can name innumerable housing societies. They are called Tivoli Gardens. The people living there wouldn't even know that Tivoli Garden is from Copenhagen, or perhaps they know and that's why they bought that. So I think in our mind somewhere, we also need to come back to what Richard was also saying, our indigenous knowledge. I think in order to look ahead, we have to look back. India, out of no choice, I would say, we are a frugal society. We were agrarian, right? So we know how to respect nature. We used to eat seasonal produce. We designed things for longevity. We had minimal wastage, even in the way we lived. If today you look at our grandparents, we still have those examples of always using local resources. So sustainability is literally like going back the Indian way. And, it's really not about a keyword for us. So as designers, when we look at this problem, we don't see it as something alien to us. We are very familiar with it. And this also has everything to do with being more authentic in today's time, preserving living traditions, having education of indigenous things and structures, languages. I think all of these contribute. But I also say, like Richard said, designers have to be hopeful. And I would like to say, from this part of the world, and I would say this for all South Asian women, that we still wear our traditional dress. And 70% of us wear that dress even today. So I know that women are doing their part in trying to be holding on to what is really, indigenous to us. And the other part that I would perhaps differ a little bit from Richard here is the behavioral change part. Because in India, I think Indian society thinks that what we do doesn't affect the world. It's high time that what we do, no matter how small, affects the world in a way that may be detrimental. So I think we need to take that stance. And yes, the other quote which I really would like to emphasize on, that sustainability is not about being the best or the absolute. It's about being better. So whether you are becoming a vegetarian or you're leaving leather, I think we are all in this journey of becoming better than what we were, rather than, and there is no definition of being the absolute best in something. So yeah, that's something I would like to add.
That is great. I think one thing that's coming up in the chat is also maybe Ayush or Mridu, one of you can talk about this. What are a couple of examples that you can think of where design has really made a difference in the South Asian or Indian context? And Richard, if you have something to add, please do. But I'm assuming Ayush and Mridu would be more suited to add here.
Mridu, you want to go?
I guess you go first. I can go there. I have a
Yeah,
couple.
no, I'll probably just highlight Arvind, even in terms of what the platform, what design can do, has surfaced in the last few years. You'd mentioned in the beginning that we've been running innovation challenges every year. One of the examples there, and it's interesting the journey that that particular innovator has taken. It's an architectural firm called Ant Studio, and they had a solution called Beehive. It's also one of the more celebrated kind of successes of what design can do in the on the subcontinent. They built a cooling system that was essentially terracotta, built by kind of the local art potters community, and they started off as a ambient cooling system, which is in places where there are large DG sets and the ambient temperature is warmer because of the emissions of the DG set. It's a tower of cylindrical kind of terracotta modules that have water percolating through it and air circulating, and that brings down the ambient temperature. But what that has transformed into over the last 4 years, I think they were a winner perhaps maybe from about 4 or 5 years back. Richard, is that right? Beehive. Yeah, and I met Monish, and he's going to be on stage on the 8th of March. So you'll hear his story firsthand. But they have evolved now into a kind of a more industrialized facade system that still is built on the same principles, right? So it still uses terracotta. They have created kind of a supply chain with the potters community and some parts of it which have been industrialized, but now they are actually incorporating that into all of their built environment, or at least those that those clients that would care to throw a penny at sustainability. So that's one example of a very indigenous kind of craft that has made its way into a modularized, modern, contemporary build system. Is that kind of happening at scale? Perhaps not, but I think it's a great example of how and where change begins, right? Because we have to remember that it is a mindset that each of us also has to carry before these things kind of add up and really manifest at scale. But that's one kind of simple example of it. Mridu, you had another to
Thanks,
share.
Ayush. Yeah, I would first, I saw it in the comments also. There's a question on the built environment. I think perhaps because there's a lack of examples is the call to action. I am very motivated with the fact that luxury today should be about conscious living. And that is something as architects, as interior designers, we must try to see that we have to change the narrative, that it's not about always getting the most expensive Italian stone from Italy, getting it quarried, bringing it all the way here, localize things and so on. But I mean, if you want to see good example, you must come to our festival. That's one. But I would also like to give you some examples of the way students are looking at this, not at just a product level. So recently we did a project with Foster and Partners, the international architecture firm, on urban heat in Delhi. And as you know, in 2024, we've had the highest temperature ever recorded in Delhi during the summer season, and it's got the maximum number of heat waves that have come in. So we did this project on what can we do, and we are talking about Delhi, and we realized, and one of using a design thinking framework, one of the examples that students worked on was that India is I'm exaggerating, but India is the cooking capital of the world. On an average, we cook for 13 and a half hours in a week, and the world does it in 6 hours. And all this cooking generates a lot of heat. And even such a small thing as cooking really adds to Delhi's environment, because there are around 3,000 kitchens in 1 square kilometer in Delhi. And then student design systems on how to harvest that heat and use it to heat water in the houses and so on. So that's one example of what can be done. Of course, a classic old example of social innovation is the mitti cool, which is the refrigerator without electricity. And I think that's also an example which could be scaled. But I think there are not enough examples, and that's why we started our institute. That's what Ayush is also talking about. That's what Richard is also talking about, that this needs more impetus and more importance.
That is great, and I think hopefully those couple of specific examples are a teaser, and I think I want to take that momentum into kind of visioning the future, right? I think when problems exist, opportunities exist, right? And I want to open this up to the three of you to talk about, given that we've spoken about the uh, context of design in South Asia, given the problems that are specifically existing here, what kind of opportunities does this lay out for one, designers, innovators, in fact, all the stakeholders involved in sustainability and circularity? And how is part of this going to be showcased and really experienced at the event on March 8th, right? So I think that would be a great, hopeful, future-looking place to get into before we open it up to the AMA. I think we have a lot of very interesting questions that we will have to take head on. But I think let's look a little bit future. Talk about the opportunity. Who does these opportunity exist for? And how does the event play a role in showcasing those opportunities? Richard, you want to start us off?
Well, in all honesty, I do think that it should be Ayush and Mridu addressing the real issues in India or Southeast Asia. But saying something about the event, what I think is important in the context of these challenges and opportunities, what already for 14 years we have been promoting is, of course, the power of design, and indeed the innovative power of design. So what you can experience on 8 March is not only a few great names that will give you a beautiful story on the stage, but indeed also those young creative innovators. And again, it's not only about a nice chair or a funky poster, but it's really about how, for example, how you bring communities together, how you think about climate issues now and in the future. And what we also will do is connecting the situation in Delhi and India with an international perspective. Because what we always find so interesting is that, of course, there are all kinds of very specific questions to be answered in India. And by the way, I also think very specifically in Delhi, in Mumbai, in specific areas that are so different. We also want to bring that international perspective, because these big questions do not, although it's a continental country, they do not stop at the borders of India. Designers and creatives are also an international community, and we think it's so important that that we inspire each other. So a lot of Indian designers and creative entrepreneurs inspire people around the globe. So that, for example, is the reason that we also bring them to Amsterdam or to Mexico City, where we also host events. And that's, of course, also what we want to bring back to Delhi. So you will also experience, for example, visions and best practices from Mexico, which is, although it sounds very different, there are also a lot of similarities and a lot of very inspirational connections. And the same counts, of course, for the Netherlands and for Switzerland and different other countries that we will bring into the equation on the 8th of March.
Yeah, I can perhaps go next. Arvind, I think one of our sort of reasons to bring this conversation to India is because I think the questions we have around sustainability and how the human civilization kind of overcomes the crisis is really going to come through the experiences of this region, because it is starting. We are starting at a place of deficit where, if you look at any kind of quality of life indicators, the per capita for India, South Asia is far lower than the global average is. So you're starting at a point of deficit, and you have an aspiration to get to a point where, if you did it in the way that it has been done, we know what is the magnitude of crisis that will unfold. So how this region actually overcomes it is really the answer for the rest of the world. And I think that's the reason why we wanted to kind of have this conversation here. This is the start. We are hoping that this becomes kind of, perhaps a 10, 20-year kind of goal that we're able to collectively take. One of the superpowers of design is its ability to convene, mediate, and facilitate. Right? It doesn't get spoken about enough. We talk about product design and graphic and built and so on and so forth. But the ability of design to actually facilitate conversations is something you will witness. I think that is the kind of radical collaboration that's also needed in the climate space. We've seen, a lot of siloed action. There's plenty of capital flowing into decarbonization and B2B kind of applications. There is the poorer cousin, which is behavior change and consumer facing services that haven't got enough attention, but it requires that collaboration. And so what you will see also, as which is kind of a template for what we hope we are able to do over the coming years, is that there is a politician on stage, there is a philanthropic funder, there is one of the most successful kind of technology entrepreneurs in the country, there are young creatives, and there's a room full of about 420 creatives, are designers, young and old, and somewhere in between. So I think that is the collaboration that we are hoping will bring kind of new ideas. It's, if you ask me personally, there are areas like, uh, as India starts to formalize credit, we can think of how that can be more sustainable. As we start to think about digitizing services, we can think about how technology needs to be more sustainable. But the opportunities for sustainability are a million. I think what it requires is this kind of collaboration and a space where design has a seat at the table, and designers kind of actually rise up to what their responsibility is in this space.
Yeah, I would also like to say that in India, we are tired of having everything related to decor, all conferences or festivals or events. I think this is the first of its kind to bring the development sector, the government sector, and design together on a common platform with local as well as international agencies. And in this, of course, from a design point of view, you'll see bio designers, you'll see people who do systems. There are workshops that we are conducting. We are also thinking about things like what are the next SDGs, and can digital security and digital technology fit into the SDGs of 2030 that are going to come. So the conversations, of course, with the people on stage are a mix of architecture, design, social, government, tech, local, international, but also in the audience, we have some of the world's most famous social designers who are in attendance coming to this event specifically because it is in Delhi, because it's where the opportunities are. So yeah, I would really hope to see you all there on the 8th of March.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. And in case people are wondering what is this happening on March 8th, go check out what design can do live in Delhi on March 8th. You'll have all the information there, and hopefully we'll get to speak a little more about it in a future session. But for now, it's time for AMA. Or ask us anything. AUA? I'm not sure. Anyway, there are multiple people who are going to be answering your question. So I'm gonna try to instead of taking questions one by one, I'm gonna try to combine them and try to name names wherever possible. So we've had questions come in since yesterday, so people are very excited about this, and I know these questions are for all three of you, unless somebody specifically named you out. But the one thing that kind of hits home to a lot of us is something called the colonial hangover. I think Surya and Siddhant are a couple of people who've asked about this. Uh, the summary of it is like, how do we, like, when it comes to a design perspective, how do we decolonize and therefore make it hyperlocal? That's one question that's coming in. Whereas there is another perspective that's coming in is nothing. There is nothing called indigenous anymore. There, cultures have mingled, and for generations together. And what is really indigenous, right? You have your chapati in Kenya, and you have this in somewhere else, right? Like, so what really is indigenous? So I think, can we talk a little bit about how colonialism and indigenous and hyperlocal may be connected to each other, and how that manifests for design and circularity or sustainability? Any of you can take this. Yeah, Mridu, I saw you on mute. Go for it.
I think we need to also, while we use this word decolonized in a very, especially in this part of the world, very generously, I think we also need to acknowledge that there are some things that are universal. And that's the intention of also partnering with our Dutch partners. It's not just about there is things to learn from everywhere. In our colonial past, like I said, when we got independence, really there was an urge to have nation building. Now with our capitalistic, increasingly capitalistic society, we are also becoming very individualistic. So one thing is, of course, to be more community oriented, more authentic. We need to start finding that, okay, that even we, if today I ask most of us, do we even speak in our local dialect? I think all of us have given up on it. I think it, for me, things also really work at an individual level, where we take the impetus of decolonizing mindsets of our parents, our immediate surroundings, and that has everything to do with finding things that are our own beautiful, or aligning to those type of things. So like I said, that one is, of course, just remove the whole Western ideology getting imposed. But also, I think today's generation, we are very curious about where we come from. How can we do something for the place that we come from? And I think those conversations are extremely important. In the design village, we have something called villaging, and villaging is all about knowing yourself and going into that deep space that may have been lost on the way. I studied in a boarding school. There was a fine for speaking in Hindi. And now when I am older, I realize, okay, there were no schools where I grew up. So that's why my parents sent me to a place like this. But you realize this only later in life. And the sooner you realize, I think, the more, so the more faster you realize that you should not be, indulging this. And therefore, education for really decolonizing the mind.
Maybe I can quickly respond before passing it to Richard. Um, I think the problem is in romanticizing indigenous. That is what a lot of us have as a first reaction when we hear kind of indigenous cultures and knowledge. So I think it's a given that the world has moved on. There are technology system solutions out there that are more widely applicable in the world, and we should be adopting them. But I think context and environment, long held beliefs that people have and societies have are still actually quite indigenous. So I would kind of challenge that, right? That there is always an aspect of indigenous kind of knowledge that you can tap into. And I think I saw another kind of comment there in terms of the problem of first principles thinking, kind of restricting this conversation around sustainability to purely a problem solving kind of tool. I think the idea of first principle thinking is also to give yourself a chance to at least tease out what is indigenous, and then kind of put that as a yardstick on whether what you're trying to embed within that context and environment is going to sit with the people who will consume it. I think that's really what it is. The It's not to romanticize, and it's not to believe that those indigenous practices will really see us through. It is what is the meeting point that you're able to find between between wisdom that has been there and the contemporary wisdom that we are armed with. I think there is a middle ground there, and not be blindsided by the fact that you have a solution, you believe that is the right way, and we're in this blind rush to actually see if we can scale and grow. That is what needs to be challenged.
Yeah, Ayush, just before we move on to the next question, I would also like to add that, sustainability always goes hand in hand with social justice. It can't exist in isolation. And to give you a very simple example, everyone thinks that the terracotta cups, if you start using terracotta instead of plastic, because it's, it is more sustainable. Terracotta removes the topsoil from the soil that we have. So again, where it's really not just about using a technology that is traditional, a material that is traditional, but also at the same time looking at consumption. So the social side of it cannot be ignored as well. And I think that is something that we need to bring in to this conversation.
Absolutely, and I think connected to that, and I wanna probably pass this on to Richard to begin with, and then he can pass it on. We spoke about the mindset piece, the social impact piece, and some of the history looking stuff. But at the end of the day, sustainability is there's a massive business case and consumer case to it, right? I think there are a few people who've asked questions around this. There's Siddharth who basically talks about sustainability being at loggerheads with the business case, and that there is a green premium, right? Like today there is a very real green premium that exists, and of course there is Ashwath who's pointed out that as we become better with our income, or as our income improves, we tend to consume more, right? So again, that while that helps businesses, it potentially goes against responsible consumption, right? And of course, this all connects to some level of at net zero and those kind of narratives. And very recently, India, of course, said that our net zero target is 2070, and for obvious reasons, right? And there's a little bit of a geopolitical tension there. So, what is this business consumerism case? How would we really break it down into its simple parts? Richard, if you can start us off.
Wow, this is a big question. Because in all honesty, I don't have an answer. If I would have had the answer, I would be maybe sort of the new Jesus Christ of the coming century. This is, of course, one of the biggest challenges that we are not able to crack, so to say. Because you can say, yes, what's now happening in India, it's a huge country. The economy is going pretty fast now. So indeed, there are all kinds of opportunities, but that also will entail all kinds of problems and potential crises. And so I find it hard. It might sound a bit disappointing for me that I say this, but I think it's also just a very big problem. And the only thing we can do is not sit on our hands and do nothing, but indeed pick up the challenge and start working on it. And that, of course, has to do with how to deal with indeed responsible consumerism, but it's really a difficult question because there are so many people who suddenly enter in as Ayush already mentioned, this middle class, and indeed they demand a better life, and they are right. They want that, but that will entail so many new questions and new issues to be tackled. The only thing I can say, it's also very interesting to see at the recent past where many countries made huge mistakes. So what I hope is that in India there will be better alternatives, and that the government and the business community in India, also looks at that, so that they learn from what went wrong. But that's also very easy for me to say, because it's such a big thing, and it's so extremely difficult to manage that. That I can only think and say that, well, we are designers, we are creatives. We should be very confident about what our skills and what our power is, and use that to the maximum, because we do have a very important role to play in that economy, so to say.
And in response to that question, if you see sustainability as a trade-off, Aravind or Siddharth, if that was the person who'd asked this question, I think if you see it as a trade-off, then of course it'll be at loggerheads with business case, right? But status quo is not going to get us there. It's quite obvious. And therefore, you have to treat sustainability as a non-negotiable, and then business will find the case. I think that's that's also the ground truth. So if you put kind of sustainability as a non-negotiable, then going back to what Richard was saying earlier, there are several other aspects of this that become necessary and prerequisites. Then, government needs to play a part for businesses to find it easier to be able to follow that path of sustainability. Behavior change needs to be a concerted effort. You can't put the onus on people themselves to change their behaviors. Environment has to provide the right nudges and right opportunities for new behaviors to manifest, right? Capital has to think about how they value their investments on sustainability. I think then those become necessary prerequisites. But by itself, if it is going to be a box that I can either check or not, then business will always find a way around it. So I don't think it's we're not, of course, I mean, there is, the largest economy in the world that's backtracking on a lot of their sustainability commitments, but that's because it's not non-negotiable right now. So the question is whether, we can, as a society, treat it as a non-negotiable. And then there are several other actors outside of just business that will have to play their part, right?
I would also like to add to what Ayush is saying, that I don't completely agree with sustainability being expensive. I think it's a matter of time. For example, when the mobile phone came, it was so expensive. Solar power is so expensive right now because we have not created the demand for it. I think it's also, we cannot treat it so simplistically. We need to break it down into what is and what isn't. But fundamentally, if today you are a business and you want to see your business grow and be healthy for the next 20, 30, 40 years, you need to have this lens. Otherwise, you will not exist in time, because the consumer is also getting very, very aware. So I know I sound highly idealistic, but I just feel that today, like the company Tom's, they make shoes, but every shoes you purchase, they donate one to someone in need. So obviously, that story or that narrative is good for the business as well. And in time, we will realize that being more sustainable is good or better business. And at the same time, while I would agree that sustainability is so expensive in most parts of the world, I think in India, we have this opportunity because we are used to homemade. We are used to handmade. We are used to homegrown. These are not concepts that are imposed upon us. This is how we lived. So I feel going back to that can truly, really create an economy that is a very good balance, and that business doesn't come at the cost of sustainability.
Right. And yeah, I think there is no one right answer, right, Richard? It's probably the most difficult question, and I opened with you. But I don't. I think we have time for one last question. I think there are a bunch of questions about different technologies, prefabs, and a bunch of stuff. But one, I think that this last question could be a good one to cap it off. Preeti basically asked about whether I know the event is the What Design Can Do live in Delhi is happening in the Indian Habitat Center. Uh, Preeti says there is a big design change which eliminated disposable cups at the Coldplay concert, right? Which obviously was a big deal, and this is specifically to Mridu, but all of you can also answer: is the event on March 8th single use free?
We are going to try. So you can bring your own bottles and your own cups because that's what we do at our school. We encourage that, but otherwise we use glass bottles for most things which are there for multiple use. But I know we are going to be scrutinized for all this. So never mind. We also have a couple of things in our back pocket which you will only find out when you come.
Anything else? Anyone wants to add on this, on the venue, and anything else that you want to share about the event?
Ayush, would you like to?
Oh, I mean, on the it's the registration link is open. I posted it somewhere in the chat. Go ahead and block your tickets. It's we'll start in the morning, but we also end the day, hopefully raising a toast to the futures we want to create together. Because there is an after hours. We'll be at the British Council. There's a fantastic kind of audiovisual show on climate. There's a UK-based artist that's coming down. So I think plenty of opportunities for us to, to commiserate, to rejoice, to be hopeful, to perhaps also be cynical. But if we are in it together, I'm sure we'll find a way. So
And there's a
yeah,
DJ on stage.
there's a DJ on stage. Yes, that's the trademark of what design can do. So
Awesome. And Richard, you've done this in different places of the world. What about Delhi excites you?
Yeah, of course, I can say a lot about this. Of course, I'm just a naive guy from Amsterdam coming to Delhi, but I'm so much looking forward to it. I think it will be super exciting, and I think it's also important to mention that yes, we will address all kinds of heavy topics, as we also did today in this conversation, but we do it with a lot of optimism and a very positive angle. And you will be captured by that if you come and join us. I will be sure about that. So, like we always do in Amsterdam, in Mexico City, in Sao Paulo, in Brazil, the events are always super energizing. And as Ayush mentioned, there's also a lot of hope. And the energy is so great, and it will give you the feeling that, okay, I'm not alone, because I can imagine that sometimes as a designer or as a creative entrepreneur, you can maybe feel a bit alone. You're sort of fighting these big giants. But indeed, if we convene and do it together, you will get this sense of okay, I can do it.
Awesome. That is a hopeful note for us to end this conversation on. This was great. I know this was a few days, a few weeks coming. Thank you, Ayush, Richard, and Mridu, for engaging in this conversation. I know it's not the easiest topic to discuss and not come off as a certain way, just like be too generic or too pretentious. And I think based on what we saw in the chat, I definitely believe that there were some real knowledge transfer and insights that got exchanged. So I really thank you for being here, and all the best with the event. And hopefully you'll see some of the people who came here there as well. Yeah. Thank you.
thank you, Aravind. Thank you, SusMafia, for organizing it. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day, guys.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.
See you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Bye. Bye.